Thank you all for coming for the second in a series of conversations that we are planning to have around liberal arts learning in the digital age. We had a good start in the sciences last week, and this will be on Digital Humanities Initiative. The context in which we are having these conversations is to explore where the library and technology services should go to in the next few years. So as you listen to the presentation, I would like to encourage everybody to explore that question so that the discussion that follows would help shape the future of library and technology services in the college. I've been asked to be brief, so I'm going to get out of here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jennifer Bartle, and I'm the Digital Collections Librarian here in LTS. And on behalf of the team that organized today's event, Eileen Hardy, Laura O'Brien, Alana Kumbier, where are you? Becca Darling, and Heather Woods, I'd like to, and on behalf of all of LTS and Wellesley College, I'm really thrilled to welcome Professor Angel David Nieves today here to Wellesley College campus. He's visiting us today from Hamilton College in central New York State, where he is the associate professor and the chair of the Africana Studies Department. And he's also a co-director of the Digital Humanities Initiative, which is a unique Mellon Foundation grant-funded initiative that is intended to promote research and teaching collaboration in which new media and computing technologies are used to promote humanities-based research, scholarship, and teaching across the liberal arts. Just a quick note about the format for today. Professor Nieves will be speaking for approximately 40 or 45 minutes. After that, we'll be opening the conversation to the audience. And we just ask to help with recording that you use one of the two circulating microphones when asking questions or making comments. You can also follow and contribute to the Twitter back channel by using this hashtag, WellesleyDH. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Angel David Nieves.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. Good afternoon. Oh, come on, y'all. Y'all can do better than that. Good afternoon. I usually make my classes say proudly and loudly good morning or good afternoon, depending on where we are on the day. It shows enthusiasm. I'm extremely honored and thrilled to be here. The excitement here is palatable, and I really want to say much about digital humanities, but much about the kind of collaboration that I'm already seeing here on the ground. And I think it's going to put you in great stead for developing what is, I think, a fruitful endeavor towards digital humanities further. So I just want to thank Jennifer, Eileen, Laura, and Becca for a great lunch and conversation earlier today. It's always a pleasure talking to such exciting and forward-thinking colleagues. It's always nice to also see that happening at a small liberal arts college as well, to see us sort of moving and advancing our scholarship, research, and teaching in new ways. I also want to thank the additional members of the Symposium Planning Committee for bringing me to campus today, and LTS for their support. It's been a great visit thus far. Hopefully I'm not going to disappoint. Since the fall of 2008, I've had the distinct privilege of working with an interdisciplinary team of scholars, IT professionals, programmers, and students in the development of a comprehensive digital humanities program at Hamilton College. It's pictured here, a small private liberal arts college in upstate New York. Hamilton, founded in 1812, has its roots in an early missionary experiment to educate the sons of local farmers and the daughters of the nearby Oneida Indians. After almost 20 years of experimentation, beginning in 1793, the mission to educate Native peoples alongside white settlers failed. The academy that was later transformed into Hamilton College was officially chartered in 1812. I go into a little bit of the college's early founding because of its long history in experimentation and adaptation in the wake of educational change. Today, liberal arts colleges and universities face a set of unprecedented challenges as they prepare their students for employment, leadership, and service. Specifically, in the wake of America's fiscal crisis, they must attempt to justify the growing cost of attending these or those four-year private schools with a history of extreme privilege. Educators at the college level are also being asked to expand opportunities for students of science, technology, mathematics, and engineering, while these same educators grapple with changes in research and teaching triggered by the revolution in digital technologies. Irrespective of our disciplinary training or research agenda in the humanities, sciences, social sciences, or even the arts, the most basic implements of our educational toolkits, i.e. the book or the library catalog, have been changed dramatically within the last 10 years, I would say within the last 20 years especially. These changes are in part a result of the work of digital humanities, which is still somewhat in flux as we try to define the contours of the field outside the traditional boundaries of the Research 1, R1, or Research University, and instead find it a place in liberal arts settings like where we are today. So the liberal arts model, and this is going to be sort of a quick little overview of what I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm not going to get into any great length on it. You can follow this along. The liberal arts model, which has maintained a strong and principled foundation in teaching undergraduates, can no longer ignore the kinds of pedagogical shifts and epistemological questions that have resulted with the growth of computational technology. Since the late 1990s, the shift from humanities computing, once something little more than technical support or support services, has evolved into an intellectual endeavor with its own professional practices and theoretical explorations. A new generation of scholars trained in the digital humanities is beginning to stake a claim within this burgeoning field, demanding that tenure-track positions, formerly the domain of the teacher-scholar, change their focus from those of a somewhat single-minded teaching college to a broader-based research college in very short order. These types of changes, now coinciding with the ever-tightening economic market, have forced the liberal arts college to begin looking to new revenue streams for curricular innovation and modes of scholarly inquiry. For those scholars across the humanities who relied exclusively on their home institutions for support, the murky waters of grant seeking and foundation support are now the only revenue stream available for a sustainable future. Schools such as Hobart, William Smith, Union, Colgate, St. Lawrence, Skidmore, and Hamilton College have, among their peers who are known as the New York School or the New York 6 Liberal Arts Consortium, have all embraced the advent of new digital technologies in different ways based on existing resources and institutional leadership. In her letter to the Mellon Foundation in support of our April 2010, and I should say April 2010, which was not that long ago, which I hope will give you lots of hope for how it is possible to get something like this started. Joan Hines Stewart, Hamilton College's president, wrote, and I quote, "The humanities without question remain the center of a liberal education, providing perspective on other academic disciplines through explorations of history, language, and culture. This has been the paradigm since ancient and medieval times, and it is important to sustain those canons of knowledge for the 21st century. However, to remain fresh and vital to new generations of students and faculty who have come of age in a digital world, the humanities must embrace the tools of technology to enhance scholarship, create knowledge, and inform curricula. Hamilton's DHI will make these digital tools available to faculty and their student partners, train them how to employ these tools to create new knowledge and interactive collections of artifacts, and help them integrate their discoveries into the classroom and beyond. To ignore these opportunities is to risk the educational relevance of the humanities." End of quote. For Stewart, the tectonic shifts along the humanities fault lines has meant that in order to remain relevant to those students who seek a broad liberal arts education, we must be willing to address, at least in part, the ever-mediated digital culture. The digital world must be fully embraced by those of us in the liberal arts if we are to remain at the cutting edge of humanistic inquiry. In order to address the importance of the digital humanities at an institution such as Hamilton, it is also necessary to understand the basic tenets of a liberal arts education. Interestingly, a member of our New York 6 Consortium of Colleges, David Sullivan, former president of St. Lawrence, best describes the role of technology in learning. He writes, quote, "Liberal learning is broad and deep, responding to new dimensions of knowledge and encouraging intellectual development. It promotes learning styles that tend toward creative expression." End of quote. Clearly, Sullivan supports a liberal education that inspires students to find meaning in what they do as lifelong learners, while preparing students to make a difference in a wide array of careers. Sullivan contends that liberal learning is inextricably tied to technology and knowledge rooted in the disciplines. For Sullivan, the agreed-upon outcomes of a liberal education include a long list of intellectual and practical skills such as written and oral communication, inquiry, critical and creative thinking, quantitative literacy, information literacy, and individual and social responsibility. All of these skills closely align with our own model for a liberal arts education at Hamilton, and I'm sure it's no different here at Wellesley, as we evolve to understand information literacy and deploy best practices for our student learners as collaborators with our faculty involved in digital humanities-based work. So digital humanities is a diverse and still emerging field that embraces the practice of humanities research in and through information technology and the exploration of how the humanities are evolving through engagement with technology, media, and computational methods. Scholar Kathleen Fitzpatrick has argued that the digital humanities could be understood as, quote, a nexus of fields within which scholars use computed technologies to investigate the kinds of questions that are traditional to the humanities, or, is more true of my own work, ask traditional kinds of humanities-oriented questions about computing technologies, end of quote. So the history of the term digital humanities is detailed by my former Maryland Institute for Technology and Humanities colleague, and I know also a colleague of Jennifer's, Matt Kirschenbaum, in a 2010 article in the Association of Departments of English Bulletin. In 2001, the field, he writes, in 2001, the field was known as humanities computing and has been around for some decades when Susan Schreibman, Ray Siemens, and John Unsworth, three of its key proponents, entered into discussions with Blackwell Publishing about editing a volume tentatively entitled A Companion to Humanities Computing. Blackwell wanted a title that might appeal to a much wider range of readers from a variety of fields, and so proposed, quote, a companion to digitized humanities. Unsworth instead, smartly, said, digital humanities is the best way to keep the field from appearing to be simply about digitization. And I think in our conversations throughout the day, we've learned that this is much more than just digitization. We've gone so much further than that. Digitization is just essentially one small step in a much broader kind of process. So the name has stuck, as Matt Kirschenbaum says, and Fitzpatrick also argues that helping to characterize a robust area of research and teaching supported by a number of prestigious conferences, well-received journals, scholarly societies, and even a dedicated office within the National Endowment for the Humanities, end of quote. So clearly, digital humanities is here and here to stay for quite some time. So digital humanities thus grows specifically out of an attempt to make the term humanities computing, which sounded as though the emphasis lay on the technology, more palatable to humanists more generally. The field's background in humanities computing has resulted in projects that focus on computing methods applicable to textual materials, many of which had dominated the field. I think we know all too well the work of the Walt Whitman Archive or the William Blake Archive. These are just two examples of annotated scholarly editions. Digital humanities has also changed considerably in the last 5 years. If we look at projects such as Ushahidi or even Digital Harlem, each of which I would argue moves digital humanities scholarship to examine deeper issues of social justice and community-based empowerment. I disagree with scholar Alan Liu, who describes the current situation of digital humanities as the following, quote, rarely do we extend the issues involved into the register of society, economics, politics, or culture in the vintage manner, for instance, of the Computer Professionals for Social Responsibility, or CPSR. He continues to write, how the digital humanities advance, channel, or resist the great post-industrial, neoliberal, corporatist, and globalist flows of information, come capital, for instance, is a question rarely heard in the digital humanities associations, conferences, journals, and projects with which I am familiar. Again, this is Alan Liu speaking. And he concludes by saying, not even the cliched forms of such issues as the digital divide, privacy, copyright, and so on get much play, end of quote. Well, I'm here to say that the digital humanities is much broader than Alan has even suggested, and we are busy doing that kind of work. So projects at Hamilton's Digital Humanities Initiative are addressing a wide range of issues, including Indigenous land claims against the Canadian government by the Sinaic Nation, human rights abuses in South Africa, heritage conservation in Tanzania, territorial boundary disputes in Kashmir, issues of gentrification during the New York school movement, virtual recreations of Paris in the 19th century, and contemporary Japanese performance art, to name only a few. I will describe a few of the projects in greater detail, but it is important for you all to have a better sense of where we started and how we have arrived at this point in our efforts to establish a sustainable model for digital humanities-based scholarship and teaching at a small liberal arts college such as Hamilton, and perhaps something that is easily replicable at a peer institution such as Wellesley. In a year-long process of discussion and proposal writing with the Mellon Foundation, starting in the fall of 2009, we had a great many conversations with our deans, faculty, colleagues, and IT professionals about the opportunities of integrating more digital technologies into a broad array of research agendas across the humanities. We were fortunate to secure a 3-year, $800,000 grant from the Mellon Foundation in the late summer of 2010 to develop a sustainable model for digital humanities-based research, teaching and scholarship for liberal arts colleges with profiles very similar to Hamilton's. The broader intent of the grant was to develop a model or prototype infrastructure that allows humanity-based research, or what we also call humanistic-based research, for faculty and students to work collaboratively on a common project. In order to build the programmatic and administrative infrastructure needed to create the first comprehensive digital humanities initiative at a liberal arts institution, an entirely new approach, we actively sought out an array of stakeholders from across the college. Liberal arts colleges possess a distinct advantage over research universities. Colleges enjoy an intimate, collaborative, iterative learning process between faculty and students, while universities often employ large lecture formats and rely on graduate student instructors. I would say that my own career is reflective of some of that, having come from research ones before. I could say that the kind of advantages that we have at a small liberal arts colleges are nothing in comparison to the research one. The kind of intimate relationships that we can develop with our students across scholarship and teaching is an amazing thing that I think we can take into some really interesting ways and new ways of thinking about a humanistic inquiry. DHI builds on the significant strengths of Hamilton College by emphasizing the interdisciplinary nature of humanities research and incorporating students as scholarly partners on significant original research projects. So the topic of digital humanities proper began percolating through Hamilton's Humanities Division more than a decade ago. At that time, our Information Technology Services, or ITS, and library departments created the Hill Group, or what we come to know as the Hamilton Information and Learning Liaisons, which supports faculty in the identification, selection, and use of technologies and content applicable to their teaching needs. Here we're looking at sort of the model in which we follow for the Hill Group. The Hill Group works with faculty closely in their courses. The infrastructure of the Hill Group is now well developed and emphasizes digital literacy development through each phase of the learning process. It is scaled to support about 22 courses per semester, which impacts approximately 25% of the student body. Shortly after the Hill Group began its work, a small but active group of faculty recognized that with increasing frequency, moving images were being introduced into courses. So a small working group was formed, and FILM, the Forum on Images, Languages, and Motion, was conceived. Film sought to provide an ongoing basis for discussion of visual representations in the humanities in the most general sort of way, how images reflect changes over time, in different places, through different forms, and how they have affected our knowledge of human nature and human culture. To provide further support for this early work using technology to enhance teaching, the Booth Ferris Foundation awarded Hamilton a $100,000 grant to establish the Multimedia Presentation Center, or MPC, which I think is very similar to perhaps your Learning Commons or discussions that you're having about a Learning Commons, a state-of-the-art computing facility housed in the library that is equipped with the latest generation of hardware and software and providing a full range of support services focused specifically on empowering students and faculty to learn, teach, and communicate through multimodal forms. In 2007, Hamilton, Colgate, and St. Lawrence University received an instructional innovation grant from Knightley to investigate the potential of using moving images to forge interdisciplinary connections on liberal arts campuses. The working group found that while synergies quickly developed across campuses, faculty needed significant assistance in working with technology, understanding pedagogical approaches and using multimodal assignments, evaluating student work, and in identifying technological resources on their own campuses. The results of this collaborative work are available in this final report, and I'm happy to provide the links to this work to Jennifer so she can pass that on. So phase one of DHI's Digital Humanities Initiative, of Hamilton's Digital Humanities Initiative, will enable the college to build the programmatic and administrative infrastructure needed to create this Digital Humanities Initiative that brings together scholars from a variety of fields, and now one of my pages is flipped. Two main objectives as part of phase one of the project include, quote, building a kind of programmatic foundation of lectures, symposia, workshops, and curricular integration for the digital humanities, and two, developing this sustainable infrastructure model, or what sometimes we refer to as the back end, that allows for a fully integrated digital repository. I have to sort of pause and say the back end. It always seems to be very foremost and in the very front of our minds, the development of this infrastructure, which we've been very much focused on the past several months and are hoping to actually roll out in the next few weeks. Once those become available, I'll provide some links to you folks as well so you can see how some of that worked. So subsequent phases include the development of our presentation or workspace layer that pulls in items from the digital repository by use of local or even international scholarly partners. So some of our projects include a study of Benchy Performance in Japan, which is Kyoko Omori's comparative Japanese film archive. The study of ritual and Confucius temples in China. This is Thomas Wilson's work on the cult of Confucius. The preservation of liberation heritage and historic sites in Tanzania and South Africa, which is some of my work. The influence of dancer Mears Cunningham on the New York School, which is Catherine Kodat's work in the English department, The Locution of Location. And the work of Kashmiri poet laureate Agha Shahid Ali, which is Patricia O'Neill's development of the Agha Shahid archive. And here you're looking at one sample of a letter from Shahid to his family. Each project is made up of a team of scholars from various institutions who are working in collaboration with our Hamilton faculty fellows, 2 or 3 student undergraduates, and a collection development team comprised of a librarian, a metadata librarian, an IT network infrastructure developer, a programmer, and a front-end designer. For us at Hamilton, the digital humanities is a diverse and still emerging field that embraces the practice of humanities research in and through information technology and the exploration of how the humanities are evolving through engagements with that technology, media, and computational methods. For my colleagues and me, digital humanities enables scholars to move beyond traditional humanistic inquiry by providing access to new information, by enabling the examination of artifacts and sites from different perspectives, by presenting information in new and more iterative ways, and by encouraging and supporting collaborations with students as scholarly partners. So as outlined in our Mellon proposal, some of the key differences between Hamilton's model for the Digital Humanities Initiative and more traditional digital humanities centers includes the following. First, that it's a liberal arts initiative. So the ultimate goal is to create a consortium of liberal arts colleges collaborating on digital humanities scholarship. So no one institution, no one small liberal arts college can do all of this work. So actually drawing on the particular strengths of each institution. We perhaps have particular foci or particular strengths. Perhaps those strengths would include folks in TEI versus others who may be more in geospatial, and sort of culling those resources together, that experience, into a broader kind of consortium where we can rely on one another for certain kinds of efficiencies when using or proposing this kind of work in our scholarship and teaching. The second is in faculty-student digital scholarship. So research projects and non-copyrighted objects and collections will be shared in progress with the broader scholarly community for feedback, collaboration, and review. We also make sure that there are direct ties to the curriculum. One of the advantages of doing this kind of work is to make sure that there always is a component that ties to the curriculum. We wouldn't be able to do the kind of work that we're doing if there wasn't a direct link into the curriculum. And at every step of the way, we actually require faculty who are going to begin working with us that some aspect of some course that they're teaching be digital in some way, that some exercise they do begin to sort of take them in this direction. So it's really important to sort of cut your teeth on this early on. And one way to do it is just do it in the classroom. And I've got some steps that are perhaps somewhat obvious, but I'll talk about those at the end of my talk. And the last is sustainable. And this is perhaps one of the most critical points of our work building this infrastructure, is understanding that we can no longer build one-off websites because they're not sustainable, right? Because they cannot be maintained The infrastructure for them cannot be supported, essentially, given the kinds of small staffs that we have. So creating an infrastructure that's replicable, where we can essentially create these projects, and these projects can morph over time and change and grow as the project grows, is really important. So creating direct ties between DHI and the curriculum, as I said, is crucial to the success of a digital humanities program. Faculty at Hamilton in the departments of English, Comparative Literature, Government, and Africana Studies were already teaching numerous courses which incorporate existing digital technology as a methodological tool. Courses that incorporate new media and digital technologies have tended to fill more rapidly than traditionally taught courses, and extracurricular activities that involve moving images and computer-enhanced interactions were already flourishing on campus. So we were fortunate there was already a rich foundation for that. Moreover, those faculty assessing learning outcomes, I know we all love learning outcomes, resulting from rich, that was a joke, folks, resulting from rich media-based assignments reported deeper engagement with content, increased critical understanding of communication in multimodal formats, and both cognitive and affective learning characteristics that led to greater retention of the subject matter. So in the spring of 2009, faculty with interests in cinema and new media studies were able to develop a new minor based on existing courses already taught by current Hamilton faculty. The only courses that had not been developed or previously taught were introductory courses in those fields. And so at the close of our first year and a half, we've already seen a great many new opportunities that have emerged for continued development of digital humanities-based courses. So this fall, Janet Simons and I, my co-director, will teach the first iteration of a new course, Introduction to Digital Humanities, as part of the Cinema and New Media Studies minor. And interestingly enough, it will be cross-listed in Africana Studies. So it's doing a whole bunch of new things for the college in a number of different ways. So Hamilton's DHI brings individual faculty efforts together under one coordinated program, raising the profile of this kind of work and that of the humanities division, creating synergies across the disciplines as well as with other institutions, universities, colleges, museums, archival collections, historical sites, etc. If I actually was to show you the list of institutional partners and researchers that we have, I'd have to fill 3 or 4 slides, single-spaced, because of the kind of work that we're doing, because it's collaborative, because we're asking new questions about the humanities in new ways. It's critically important to have all of these project partners. So by providing support for digital-based scholarship, enriching the curriculum by enabling faculty to explore humanistic questions with newly developed digital tools, and encouraging the exploration of technology's impact on the humanities, we are seeing how a change in modes of scholarly practice and knowledge production can be effected. For example, Associate Professor of Japanese Dr. Kyoko Omori is currently developing her comparative Japanese film archive using silent film as the basis of her work. Her work goes beyond earlier scholarship on Japanese modernism, which simply took Euro-American models as definitive and assumed unidirectional influence from west to east. In the process of studying literary modernism, Omori has also begun to explore cultural production associated with different sensory modalities, especially the auditory sense, which led to the study of Benchy Performers. I'm sure you're all asking, what the heck are Benchy Performers? So the term Benchy literally means a speaker or lecturer. However, during the silent cinema era, the term referred specifically to live performers who stood adjacent to a movie screen in spotlight and performed 3 distinct auditory roles: plot narration, character dialogue of all the characters, and impromptu commentary on the movie, actors, and story. So they earned their keep. As part of her project, she has done extensive archival research and collected rare Benchy recordings on old discs and Benchy scripts. She's also taking a practicum class to actually learn some of the art herself. Kyoko is amazing. Because of her many working connections with film archives, private collectors, and the handful of contemporary Benchy performers who are actually continuing this artistic tradition in the 21st century, she, along with Waseda University in Japan, have also gained access to rare silent film pieces and continue to build this collection. This is just one example. I've learned over the years not to show live demos because There's just a number of reasons things can go wrong, but again, I'll send a link to everyone so you can actually see the demo, how it works. The film essentially plays in the main window. You'll see the silent era film. This is actually the House of Usher. You will see the Japanese transcription. You will see the translation, and you'll actually hear the Benchy Performer over this. It's an amazing way of accessing the data, and as you see along the bottom, the related media can all be accessed that's related to that particular film clip or film, and it changes obviously depending upon where in the film you stop and what you access. So it's quite an amazing interface. So Assistant Professor of Archaeology, Dr. Nathan Goodale, is currently working with the indigenous community of the Sinixt Nation in the Slocan Valley of British Columbia. Since 1989, the Sinixt have been engaged in litigation against the Canadian government in protest for road building and excavation at the site of an ancient village and burial ground. The Sinixt are an interior Salish people who were declared extinct by the Canadian government in 1956, effectively eliminating Sinixt from any benefits under the Indian Act, including a land base or reservation. Their traditional territory spans the U.S.-Canadian border, which was established in 1846. Many Sinixt gravitated towards the Colville Indian Reservation, actually in Washington state. The Sinixt territory has been devastated by a century of industrial mining, logging, and dams. Goodale's project seeks to settle their land claims, help the Sinixt reconstitute their sacred tribal lands, and begin the process of developing self-help strategies for community empowerment. So my own project, the Soweto Historical GIS Project, seeks to build a multi-layered historical geographic information system database that explores the social, economic, and political dimensions of urban development under South African apartheid regime in Johannesburg's all-black township of Soweto. Soweto, an acronym for the Southwestern Townships, a creation of state power, was developed to house low-wage workers and to segregate black South Africans from white. No African studies scholars to date have examined Soweto using historical GIS during the apartheid era. Much of the previous scholarship using GIS has focused on reconstruction during the post-apartheid era. The application of geographic methodologies to the study of the anti-apartheid movement reveals the complex spatial dimensions of violence, resistance, and freedom. The project examines the microgeography of resistance and the layering of meaning and action between the apartheid state and township residents across its built form. So by documenting across space and time the racial, political, and ideologies of apartheid within these townships, or what I call the black labor machines, an important question is raised. Can we map residents' resistance to oppression using GIS? Research suggests that modernism, as expressed through urban planning and architectural design, here you're looking at just one small segment of Soweto, how it was planned, was upended by the ground-up activism of township residents in the struggle against apartheid. The Soweto HGIS project spatial history database will be used to record and analyze a wider range of spatiotemporal features, both physical and human, of apartheid and resistance by township residents. So the last sort of case study I'm going to talk about is our class program. Some of you may already be a bit familiar with it. We're also taking the lead in promoting new cross-institutional collaborations with faculty and students through a grant initiative by the Mellon Foundation. CLASS is an undergraduate fellowship and research program in the digital humanities based on 3 broad areas of scholarly inquiry and their intersection with new and emerging technologies. 1, culture, 2, liberal arts, and 3, society. CLASS provides a unique partnership between the departments and programs across the liberal arts and humanities at Hamilton with our Career Center. And let me explain how. CLASS provides students with skills training in digital literacies through intensive research and scholarship coupled with 2 unique internship experiences. In the summer between sophomore and junior years, students work alongside a faculty member and project team as a co-collaborator on a proposed project. It is required that collaborative research in the digital humanities be the primary focus of the students' summer work, the equivalent of a kind of full-time job, typically for 8 weeks of the summer. In the summer between junior and senior years, CLASS, in partnership with the Career Center, offers undergraduate students an intensive professional development experience and provides a comprehensive overview of work in their respective fields of interest. So we've already had students who have done internships at Museo del Barrio, at Hunter College. We're also working with WGBH and some film companies where our students will actually be integrated and get this kind of first-hand experience using the kind of tools they've developed in that first summer. So the second internship experience is chosen by the student. We've sort of have an agreed upon list of pre-approved opportunities with either these cultural organizations or these multimedia-based entities. After their second internship experience, students are prepared to enter employment and or graduate study or to go on to graduate study, having mastered a range of new digital literacies. So I'm almost going to wrap up. David Barry, in his 2011 essay, The Computational Turn, Thinking About the Digital Humanities, writes, quote, "The digital humanities try to take account of the plasticity of digital forms and the way in which they point toward a new way of working with representation and mediation, what might be called the digital folding of reality, whereby one is able to approach culture in a radically new way," end of quote. Barry argues that in order to mediate an object into, quote, "a digital or computational device requires that the object be translated into the digital code that it can understand," end of quote. This kind of mechanization process, or as Barry describes, a kind of cutting up of the world, relegates some of that encoded information into discarded matter, much of which could not be understood or manipulated into a grid of usable numbers by an algorithm. The digital humanities, however, allows the scholar and programmer practitioner to question the manner in which that information was originally processed and provides a new way of gathering those leftover pieces and parts into a translatable or understandable set of new data streams. I contend that an ability to recognize that series of processes and engage in a more systematic and pedagogical series of queries is only possible with an inter and multidisciplinary team of scholars, programmers, librarians, and designers who are trained in fields from across the liberal arts. I'm convinced that this model will help to create and develop a new humanities environment both at Hamilton, and I'm already seeing the inklings of that here, one where faculty research projects enrich the undergraduate experience through collaborative investigation in and out of the classroom. And like I said, I'm already seeing some of this here. And I've been exposed to some of the projects, scholars like Jens, and I'm going to totally butcher people's names, so please excuse me. Scholars like Jens Cruz, Carlos Vega, Martha McNamara, Jackie Musacchio, Jennifer Bartle, and others are all making significant contributions in their respective fields into the digital humanities community already. So I want to close with a question that will perhaps help generate some further debate and discussion. I'm returning to where I began with this talk, asking, what is digital humanities? What are the digital humanities? In a recent blog post entitled, "A Still Way Too Broad Definition of Digital Humanities," Liz Grumbach at Texas A&M asked, quote, "Can the definition of digital humanities somehow focus on methods, tools, and critical inquiry that helps illuminate what it is to be human in the digital age?" End of quote. For my colleagues and me at the Digital Humanities Initiative, being a scholar, practitioner, and teacher in the field requires us to define ourselves as digital humanists, where concerns over the political, social, and economic forces that shape our experiences is front and center in every decision we make as a team. We see digital humanists as public intellectuals. All of our efforts must lead to a broader engagement with the public and have some sort of civic resonance whenever possible. As I understand that there are already courses incorporating various DH methodologies that are ongoing and sort of under the radar here at Wellesley, because there currently is no formal way to support these sorts of projects or no sort of sustained kind of way to support these projects. What I'd like to do now is to provide some points or even strategies that might help you to more formally initiate those conversations about the need to support these kinds of projects in the future. So here are some things to consider. These are very basic. These are not mind-blowing by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm hoping they'll provide a little bit of fuel for the kind of work that's already begun here. So begin a campus-wide assessment or poll over email of work currently underway. You might not necessarily be aware of all the projects, courses, and research that is being conducted. Even at a small liberal arts college, and I know it's hard to say because when I first went for my interview at Hamilton, my colleague said, well, you know, it's a really small place here at Hamilton, so at one end of campus you would have burped, and by the time they find out about it at the other end of campus, they'll say you farted. So it's clear that our campuses are small. You guys are not a lively crowd. It's okay to laugh. Okay, so even at a small liberal arts college, it is entirely possible to be unfamiliar with the work of being done in the digital humanities or in media studies. So we don't always know what our colleagues are doing. We get so involved in our teaching, we don't often even know what our colleagues are researching. 2, find small pockets of research funds to help support course development among the faculty. A $250 to $500 stipend for books and related materials might help a faculty member consider changing certain aspects of their course assignments into a digital project. It doesn't take a lot of money. 3, provide opportunities for faculty, librarians, and IT professionals to meet across the table and discuss changes, developments, in scholarship and teaching that embrace interdisciplinarity. And you're already doing number 3, so we can put a big check through that one. 4, help faculty to think big about their research. Even at small liberal arts colleges, faculty should be encouraged to think about their research in new ways. Pose the question, what if money was not an ongoing constraint in your work? What would you like to see yourself doing in 2 to 4 years? Develop a strategy that involves carefully isolated deliverables in a cumulative way, perhaps something that could result in a grant proposal to the NEH. 5, find ways to incorporate your most valuable resources on campus, the students. They have a particular kind of engagement with digital technologies that will allow your work to transform itself and grow. Trust me, I've been working with a group of students from Middlebury College, from their Department of Geography, with my colleague Ann Knowles, and they see things in completely different ways from me. I'm learning just as much from them as they are from me. Give up being the only expert on your topic. This is sort of number 6, and this is sort of my mantra. You know one aspect of the work, mostly contextual, that can be seen very differently through group collaboration. It is okay to no longer be the lone expert, but rather to perceive undergraduate students as collaborators. It is a model that is easily replicable and is something that the sciences have long been doing. Now I just say it's our turn. 7, if the humanities are to flourish, it is going to be important to have your chief information officer, dean, or president comprehend that the humanities are already changing in profound ways. The traditional lines of inquiry of the humanities, long-standing questions about our lived experience, are being retooled in the digital age to challenge the kinds of questions we have long asked and the processes by which we arrive at those lines of inquiry. And number 8, finally, and then I'll shut up, is to collaborate and realize that this is going to be messy and time-consuming, which will lead to new opportunity and new venues for your work. And I guess my number 9 point is, when in doubt, collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. Thank you. So floor is open for questions. Don't all jump up at once.
I was wondering if you could tell us more about the support structure that is in place with the librarians and the research instruction librarians and support staff that you were talking about at Hamilton College.
Yeah. The Hill Group actually has been in place for almost a decade now at Hamilton. It really was an effort to bring digital technologies front and center into the classroom. So what tends to happen is once a faculty member sort of says, I want to do something digital, or there's some component of the work, let's say in an anthropology course, I want to train students how to use digital recorders. You basically go to the Hill Group and you tell them, I would like to create an assignment around this tool or resource that has certain kinds of pedagogical, goals. How can I do that? How can we sort of stage that through the course of the semester? So if the final project is, and I've done it myself so I can speak from experience, if the final project is to have students go out and record the narratives of people from the local community, what essentially the team does, and the team usually is constituted of instructional technologist, a librarian, There's usually the head of instructional technology who sort of helps to oversee things, the faculty member, and sometimes there may even be a couple of student interns from our MPC who might eventually end up working with some of the students as they're sort of processing their information. Everybody comes together. Essentially, you set up a set of learning goals, but also physically set up how this is going to happen in the semester, so it gets integrated into the syllabus. So essentially, the faculty member isn't sort of coming to you and saying, I really need this project, I need to have them go out and do this sort of research in the community, and you need to figure out how to fit it into my schedule. No. It's actually a conversation across the instructional technologist and also the faculty member, and figuring out how best to sort of do that over the course of the semester, and perhaps even finding ways to then create what they'll do is workshops outside of class sometimes, depending on the use of the technology. I have tended to, I have this project in my Intro to Afro-Latino Studies that I teach. It's a postcard project, and the question is, does race matter in the US? And I tell the students to go out and make an image that responds to that question. Put it on a postcard, right? And on the back of the postcard, essentially write the text that supports the image in the front. So they don't know how the heck to put together an image, right? So we essentially build in the kinds of exercises that we would do in class, but also if there are extra sort of classes or workshops that they would need in order to do that, and we set that up with them. So it's a coordinated effort on the part of many people to sort of go in, and it has to happen, you know, before classes start, typically, and typically the semester before is often the most preferred way. So the team can sort of figure out, the Hill group can sort of figure out how all of the many courses they're supporting sort of work together. And sometimes there are overlaps so that they can actually do sort of joint sessions if they need to, again, about efficiencies. So that's sort of the support structure that's in place, and that allowed us to be able to come in and say, well, we've already got that support structure, so now what we need to do is figure out how to integrate work in the digital humanities into that infrastructure. So essentially we adopted that sort of Hill group model, but sort of tagged in metadata librarians and programmers to that team whenever we sort of tackle a particular project. Does that answer your question?
I wanted to know more about the public engagement part. You talked at the end about being sort of a civic citizen and engaging them more broadly. Could you expand on that?
Sure. You know, in many of the projects, we've been fortunate that so many of the projects have an international focus. And essentially, we found that our students want to do good, essentially, in the world. And I think the humanities allows us to sort of do that work in many different kinds of ways. And one of the things we try to ask of any of our colleagues in the Digital Humanities Initiative is what sort of public good can come of the project that you're doing, and in any kind of way sort of broadly defined. Is it something that, with the Benchy Performers, is it something about maybe perhaps helping to revive the sort of lost art form? Is it perhaps giving back by helping to create workshops that don't exist about this sort of art form? In the work in South Africa and Tanzania, one of the things we want to do is collect the narratives, and are doing, collect the narratives of liberation, of the liberation movement, but we also want to tie that into the kind of country's push to do tourism. So how do we essentially create opportunities through public history, you know, methods for there to be development projects that sort of take on the challenges of telling this complex history, but also give something back to a community. So in many ways, we try to find a sort of civic component to it, to any of the projects, because we see it as really important, more so because our students are asking for that kind of engagement. And I think there's a certain kind of resonance for them, particularly in the humanities, because in some ways they can see the good or the proposed good that would come out of science projects, right? They can sort of see eventually this research may lead to X, Y, and Z, but they don't always necessarily understand the importance of the William Blake archive and what that necessarily has to do you know, about that particular period that's way long ago. So finding ways to sort of bring that to the forward, and to actually have an applied or a civic-minded aspect is something we really try to do. Does that sort of answer? Thanks.
Technical people are here, so I'm not even supposed to be here. And they know I bug them all the time. But what I find fascinating in terms of the term digital humanities, apart from that's probably what it means, whether it's descriptive or certainly analytic. But you talk about going out to Soweto and different places and doing recording and so on. It brings to mind the fact that someone called Max Lomack, many, many years ago in the 30s, went out in the South, did lots and lots of recordings. I don't know what the nature of the civil engagement, but would you call that digital humanities?
Yes, actually I would, because essentially he was using those technologies of his time. And interestingly enough, the Smithsonian has been very much involved in taking those recordings
Later.
now
No.
and making them
No.
essentially available.
And
So he sort of did the early methodological work of gathering those narratives. What he did with them was, at his time, he at least got them.
But what I want to do, I guess I'm backing into the question, what then, does digital humanities simply means the use of the digital equipment to do it? What's the essence of that phenomenon that would differentiate what you're doing in say, Tanzania or Soweto and so on, what he did and what would differentiate, make this something that's rather than simply a description of the use of digital in the humanities that makes it its own kind of project, have its own kind of I guess, defined sense of itself.
Well, in the Soweto project, I think there are a couple of different ways that it's doing digital humanities. First, it's allowing us to gain access to these stories in ways that wouldn't normally have been accessible. So the ability to use the technology that's so readily available and out there to gather the stories is one part of it. How we then connect those digital stories to the physical places and spaces in Soweto is where the humanities questions become different, because technology will allow us in some instances, and in Soweto's case, to actually recreate some of the lost spaces and places of the liberation movement that have been bulldozed, let's say, because of tourism, because of the pressures of tourism. We can actually recreate some of these spaces and embed some of those narratives in a literal walkthrough of a space, so that someone can begin to not only hear the story, but understand how the physical environment played a critical role in shaping the kind of political movement and agitation that residents put forward. So that's one real sort of grounded way that Soweto sort of does that work. In the Aga Shahid Ali project, which I didn't show except for that one letter, it's been very interesting over the past several months to begin to know a little bit more about sort of the back end, what the professor wants the project to actually do, but there's some hesitance on her part. What's been interesting is that his poetry has become sort of so embedded in sort of the civil action and the agitation of youth that students are taking pictures of themselves with his poetry, with his books, and putting this up on Facebook. And they're essentially creating a network of similar-minded students who are actively engaged in resisting sort of what is going on in Kashmir. And a part of this project that still hasn't been developed totally is to create the social networking aspects that will allow students to actually come together and talk about these issues in ways that maybe they haven't done before. So that's yet another way in which that work is doing some of it. And each project really begins to provide new opportunities for asking very similar questions of humanities that we've been asking, but just in some different fundamental ways that I think wouldn't be possible, obviously, without the digital technology. So a lot of it is accessibility, but also the accessibility of a public to gain information from what is being done also is a hallmark and a real difference in what digital humanities is. And when we long have been talking about the death of the monograph, and our research essentially is You know, we can't just talk to the 4 people in the room that are interested in this very small, minute field of inquiry that we've always been interested in. We've got to make that scholarship more widely available. So presses like Duke, NYU, MIT, top-tier presses are beginning to develop new platforms for publishing. So that monograph that we've all relied upon is really going to be sort of tossed aside in a matter of a handful of years, and our scholarship is going to have to take on a different kind of resonance. It doesn't mean it's going to be any less peer-reviewed. It doesn't mean it's going to be any less engaged with by our colleagues. It means actually it's going to have a larger life than we ever anticipated it to have. Those are the kinds of changes that digital humanities is putting into place. Does that sort of help?
I have a couple of interconnected, more practical questions, which is these efforts take enormous amount of time and resources, both from the faculty and the support staff. Okay, so how have you been able to justify, okay, the return on investment, question number 1. Secondly, the longevity of any one of these products. What thoughts have gone into the formats, the upkeep, et cetera? What kind of commitment you have from the content developers?
Well, maybe I'll start there. We have the institutional commitment that the repository is going to be there in perpetuity. That's going to be there forever. As long as we can sort of speak about forever, which, you know, I don't know, maybe till tomorrow in many instances. But essentially, the institution has made the commitment to keep those resources and continue to develop those resources through the repository. So it's going to be in the dark archive, stored away, whatever the standards are that we're following. That's sort of number 1. In terms of the return is many because faculty are still publishing about the work. And they're actually getting more acclaim for the work that they're doing because of that more public presence that their work has taken on. So our faculty who have been long cloistered, I mean, Hamilton is in the middle of nowhere, as some of you may know personally, but our faculty are actually getting more visibility than they've ever gotten before because of this work. And so it's been interesting to see the trajectory change in that it's our senior faculty who are taking on the challenges of taking on this work and are accepting the challenges that this isn't going to be a short sort of time span for the work necessarily. This is going to be 2, 4, 6 years out. But how is that fundamentally any different from the work behind any kind of monograph that the humanities has been invested in anyway, right? Where the turnaround time was anywhere between 6 and 10 years. Trust me, I know. I still have that one manuscript on my desk 10 years later, but I've been doing some other things. So in terms of time, it's a similar investment. Financially, there's a cost involved, obviously, but it's a cost that the institution is going to have to take on irrespective because of the changes that we're forecasting and the changes that are already here about how we need to preserve not only this stuff, but how we're going to be able to use it in the future. So it's about efficiencies, I think, in the broadest sort of sense. Efficiencies in terms of time, efficiencies in terms of resources. It means we're actually stretching our dollar a little further because technology allows us to sort of do that, right? It allows us to have greater accessibility to a cadre of scholars that would have taken several $1,000s. I mean, if I really needed to work with my colleague in South Africa that I do work with, and the way that we've been working, I mean, the invention of Dropbox has made our life amazing because now we can essentially trade all kinds of information that essentially would have cost me as a researcher at least $5,000 to get my butt down to South Africa to do the work. It's not going to cost me that anymore. It costs me $99 a year to keep a subscription to Dropbox and the kind of time to work with my colleague. But those are some immediate differences in terms of cost. So it's all in proportion, I think, in terms of change.
Do you have a forum for faculty? Oh, excuse me. Do you have a forum for faculty and staff to discuss the ideas that they have?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because I'm in special collections, and we have many unique documents that individual researchers might ask for. Usually they want copies. Right. But I see potential for a lot of multimedia formats for these documents, diaries, for instance, that have places, that could have maps, that could have links to people and genealogy even. But I don't know where to go for that kind of help. And I don't know whether there would be a class. I could imagine students could take off with this.
Yeah.
And I know it's been done. I know that's one of the things Jackie Masacchio is doing, right? But I don't really know how far ahead to plan it and with whom to make it happen.
Well, luckily there are enough courses out there that have been in place for quite some time. We've talked a little bit about some of the work at DHSI, Digital Humanities Summer Institute at the University of Victoria, where essentially one goes out for sort of these week-long programs to study any number of digital technologies, any number of ways engaging with multimedia. So there are some formal ways to sort of do that. Informally, what we've started to do amongst the consortium of small liberal arts colleges is that we're starting to bring people to colleges to talk about the work. So we're sort of creating a hit list of people who have certain kind of specialties. We're sort of dragging them from place to place to begin talking to librarians, to technologists, to faculty about this. There also are a number of, Mellon has also been involved in trying to create a network. So there's a new sort of DH kind of commons where folks can talk to one another at small liberal arts colleges, but part of that will also incorporate now the research ones. So there's more discussion happening, again, on the part of Mellon, to create efficiencies where these conversations can happen across institutions. So there are opportunities and ways to do that. One of the things that we've also found, and we've done several of these already, we last year in January had a geospatial sort of workshop for a week where we brought people to Hamilton from other institutions to come and sort of learn some geospatial methodologies. Actually, in May, we're going to have an oral history workshop. So that's something that we can also make available to folks here and essentially pile into a car and come on down or up. And we can do that kind of work and really cut our teeth on that. So there's lots of conversations going on. I think some of it is that we aren't aware of all of those conversations that are going on, but we're finally starting to sort of cull those resources and we can easily have you be a part of that, all of that discussion that's going on. And the ability to really incorporate, and one of the great things Jennifer told me was that you're very invested also in making sure the students use the special collections here. And that's something that we haven't necessarily been the best in doing. I'm being taped at Hamilton. But at other institutions I've been at, having undergraduates engage with special collections is really life transforming for them, particularly in fields like Africana studies, where they begin to see, one of the early exercises I remember doing when I was at the University of Colorado Boulder was having students look at coloring books and children's racist coloring books and children's stories to sort of understand where the roots of racism are. And students today don't really know that that stuff even existed, but to be able to sort of hold that stuff, even if in gloved hands, they could see these materials, it makes a real difference, right? So that kind of engagement, but then taking that into the digital realm, I think is just as easy and just as important. And I think it's rich. The students, as you know, take off with this stuff in ways that we sometimes don't because we didn't necessarily grow up with it. I'm finally in that category. So it's important for us to say we don't necessarily know how to do all of this stuff, but we're willing to have these things happen in our classrooms.
That kind of segues into my question. I'd be really interested hearing you talk more about how this is beginning to impact learning in the classroom.
Well, there are a number of different ways that it's really been helpful and transformative for the students in the classroom. I would say that several of our students have been digital humanities interns, so they've been working one-on-one with faculty. They've also been working one-on-one with the technologists. Interestingly enough, we've had several of them apply for Fulbright, and 4 of our Fulbright scholars, of the 4 Fulbright scholars we had at Hamilton, which I think is a commendable number, 2 of them worked with the Digital Humanities Initiative and based their Fulbright work on what they had done with us. So one went off to Japan to do media and sort of culture, and another is actually working in British Columbia with the Sinic Nation on this sort of history, to sort of reclaim their history. Translated into the classroom, we've also seen these exercises take off. I had students in one of my methods courses in Africana Studies essentially map campus. Map the two campuses that we have, or three. Map the three campuses that we have, the black and white campus and the campus for the faculty. I don't know if you all know it, but our campuses are very different at certain times of the day and are very different for certain people at certain points of the day. So what I asked students to do essentially was to go out and tell me what are the spaces that they can go to or don't go to, or for whatever those reasons are, map this stuff. And it was a very interesting exercise to have them do using Google Earth. They were able to essentially map these spaces, and it was a very different campus between white students and students of color, which was illuminating for our president. She had never imagined that there was, there's only one Hamilton. She had never imagined that there were several Hamiltons. But what it also essentially did was allow students to also record their stories about what it meant for them to travel to these spaces during different times of the day. So that exercise alone translated into them sort of understanding perhaps some of the ways in which they would create new ways of enforcing sort of safety on campus for certain kinds of students. So actually they ended up working with the Dean of Students' office on creating new sets of programs that would allow students to feel safe, new kinds of buddy systems that would happen. So there are real practical ways in which that application worked. But in other ways, our students have gotten into graduate schools and have also gotten into the workforce because of their experiences in digital technologies, based solely on the work they've been doing. So there's direct translation, and that report that I'll send Jennifer, the link to Jennifer, actually gives some actual assignments from particular courses across the curriculum that'll provide you with some ways of thinking about different kinds of ways to engage students in the classroom. So I think that'll be helpful too, if I didn't answer your question totally.
Is your Learning Commons operational?
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about that, just to follow on to her question about how that has changed learning and how it works and what it looks like vis-a-vis the classroom and the day and night, different times of day for the campus?
Luckily for us, we do have sort of a, I don't know if it's a 24-hour exactly. I sort of leave campus at a certain hour and don't want to know. We have had the MPC. I will say the MPC has not been around exactly a decade, but it's probably been around at least 6 or 7 years now. And essentially, it's on the first floor of the library, and essentially a bunch of clustered computer sort of stations, which different kinds of technologies, and this is not my area, so I'm going to be a little vague about it. There are different kinds of technologies and software on different kinds of computers. So we sort of have a standard imaging, right, that has a whole suite of tools available to students. But then there are certain stations that have more of the video sort of tools that they'll need, or scanning technology, so they'll have really big flatbed scanners. And students essentially come in and use this stuff and are monitored by student interns who are trained in how to use all of these technologies. And they sort of start with students who are not only freshmen, but they try to get students early on to be interns at this, what we call the MPC. And once they get them in early as freshmen, they learn all of these technologies pretty quickly and easily. So we're sort of creating a whole cohort of students that can sort of be staffing this space. And it's a coordinated effort, not just with students, but also with instructional technologists who sit at the desk as well and provide access for students and help, sort of troubleshooting. So it's been around for quite some time. And in terms of student use, they're packed all the time. Students are on there and they're not just doing email. They really are doing other kinds of work at these stations. So we have other computer banks where students are just getting access to the online catalog versus the sort of MPC computers that are sort of different.
Are faculty there?
Yeah, faculty are there too. Faculty are there. I know I've been there. A good number of our faculty use it.
What I would find helpful is that I've actually created a digital archive for WASM, Women in Social Movements. And what I would like would be a bibliography that would be tailor-made to my courses that I could give to my students so they would know which archives, which digitized archives to go to for the projects that they're working on. Because my experience is, in fact, that there's a whole world of these out there. I mean, a ton. Mellon has been giving a lot of money for this. So like, you know, at Amherst, everything's digitized. They can go to the entire special collections at Amherst and get every letter that, I forget his name, the famous geologist, Lee's son, but I'm rambling. But I mean, every single letter is there. My problem is I don't have enough time for each course that I teach to pull together a specific enough bibliography of the various links. And so I would find it really helpful. I mean, Alana has been fabulous, but I would find it fabulous. Alana is for my courses, she's fabulous. But I think it'd be great if there could be somebody on campus who would take different professors and create for each of us an individualized bibliography of resources to the specific courses we teach that we could then give to our students that would save all of us this gigantic Google searching.
Well, you
Does
know,
that
one of
make
the
sense?
one of the hallmarks of
What?
the Hill Group essentially is to already do that kind of work with the faculty member when you first go to them and say, I'd like to do X, Y, and Z sort of exercise, help me think about this. Part of that process involves a librarian, a reference librarian, who says, what are the kinds of sources and what are the kinds of digital sources that are out there? And it's basically a kind of working relationship between the reference librarian and the faculty member, because the faculty member sort of knows more or less what kinds of sources exist out there. And if you're able to provide some sort of guidelines, because there is so much stuff out there, right? So if you're able to sort of target it for each particular course, that helps. And that helps the reference librarian be able to do their job even better. But I think, again, it's about this notion of collaboration across the table where the faculty member and the reference librarian have to sort of sit down and talk about it. What we've also found pretty fascinating, too, is to also have at those conversations, the instructional technologist and the programmer and our designer, because they also know, because they've worked on other projects, know about some things that might be useful for students to know, might have some bibliographic references that are useful. So it becomes sort of everybody throw in the best parts of their bibliography or their ideas for this particular course or exercise. And at a certain point, what the Hill Group has also been able to do is sort of make some more generic, sort of tailor-made bibliographies depending on technology. So if there's sort of video work that's being done, they can provide sort of a hit list of sources that somebody might want to look at about videos or making videos or making documentaries. There's a hit list about doing oral history work. So some of that stuff is already happening, and I think it's just part of the process. It's one step in that process, I think, that can be coordinated through the librarian and through the information technologist and through everyone on the team, essentially.
So I guess I've got a question. I don't know how many more we've got before we wrap up, but I have a question about the student involvement. So you talked a lot about the integration of the students into the faculty research projects. You talked about the class program where you've got summer interns working through that stuff. We've got a number of different initiatives that we've run here in the past, including a NAP internship program that we had running through the NAP Media and Technology Center, where we spent a great deal of time sort of bulking up the students' skills in some of these areas to be able to work on these interdisciplinary projects across campus. And so I'm curious what you're finding as you're working with the students, both in the summer research programs, but also through the coursework. Where are your students with these skills? You know, I mean, we have students who come in, they know a lot of stuff, but where are they with the skills that they can use to do this sort of higher order of research? And what are you finding is necessary in the way of sort of literacy instruction to get them up and running?
Well, what we're finding is that the skill set is pretty broad or almost non-existent. in some cases. And some of that has to do with the accessibility to technology that they've had at high schools, right? So there's a whole other digital divide question that I won't go down right now. But the skill set can be zero also because, and in one of my early courses, I do a course called E-Black Studies, and in this particular course, I've had a student famously say to me, I'm scared of computers. I mean, I only do Facebook and like email, and because you're teaching the class, I'll take it, but I'm really scared of computers. So we went from a student who had zero sort of, and fear on top of it, sort of zero experience besides Facebook, to someone who by the end of the course was actually helping other students in Dreamweaver. And if anyone's ever done anything in Dreamweaver, you need all the help you can get all the time in trying to build a website using Dreamweaver. So the skill set varies greatly, and what we try to do essentially is assume that everyone is at zero and that they've probably learned it badly anyway. And so they sort of need some retraining on how to go about it, and retraining them is about setting up some standards. So setting up standards is about what DPI should you be scanning documents at, right? How should you be using the video recording device that you're actually doing? So we set up some basic sort of levels of standards for using the materials, and also some basic skill sets that we put them through to be able to use the technologies. And some of them tend to have affinities in some areas more than others. So we try to identify that early on, where someone may actually be much better at sort of shooting video and doing that work and maybe using sound as opposed to sitting in front of the computer and editing. So essentially we provide sort of a whole cadre, a sort of wish list of tasks and tools and skills that we want them to have. And we try to provide them with a taste of each of those and see where their sort of affinities are. But we try to keep them as broad as possible so they can do a little bit of everything. But eventually they sort of fall into certain areas where they're not, you know, they're not good at certain things or better at others. So for example, GIS is not for everyone, right? There's a huge learning curve there. And some students are completely into GIS, and others, you know, you just can't get them to do much with it. So it sort of depends. And again, I'm probably also prefacing too much proprietary sort of software, because there's tons of open source stuff out there that students also find and more easily usable than ArcGIS, for example.
So I guess a common thread between this particular discussion and the one that we had last week with the interdisciplinary science talk that the faculty gave is this use of project-based learning and how these skills are attached to this project-based learning in a slightly different way than students would experience them with different learning opportunities. And I'm wondering whether Hamilton or the New York Six has had any conversation about the role of this kind of project work, this integrated research, this interdisciplinary work in building new kinds of literacies that they want the students to have before they leave the campus.
You know, we've had the discussions largely because we sort of focus on the senior projects. You know, our students are required to do senior projects, and we've identified early on that project-based learning is the hook that gets them interested in the work. So in many ways, you can almost teach them any technology or any set of skills if you hook them with the content. Because once there's a deep investment in the content and interest in the content, you know, sky's the limit in terms of what they'll be willing to sort of do. The New York Six has had conversations about it, but I don't think it's essentially gone anywhere, not that they haven't talked about taking it someplace. But it's pretty clear to us that having those skills around a particular project resonates for them and sort of gets them hooked, like I said. So it's an important way to get them to sort of, it's sort of the dirty secret way of getting them to learn the skills that you want them to learn. Because if you can seduce them with the topic, with a sexy topic, it sort of gets them in. And so that's been our experience.
Are there any further questions? If not, then I'd like to have a final thank you to Angel for your time and your talent today, and thank you all for coming, and we'll see you on Twitter.